For the investigation into President Trump and potential ties, collusion, some call it, with Russia. Do these emails represent a smoking gun? Joining me now from Chicago is Watergate Prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks. Nice to see you.
Hi, thank you.
So Donald Trump's lawyer did an interview with NBC this morning that was pretty interesting and said, I think, the predictable thing, that meeting that Trump Jr. ended up having, that exchange, that it was really about nothing because he got nothing in return, and so no laws were violated. How do you read that email exchange and the meeting?
He and I obviously went to different law schools because it does not require having gotten anything. It was the offer to provide something that was accepted. They had the meeting. That makes it against the campaign laws. You cannot take anything of value from a foreign national, let alone a foreign government. And it seems clear to me here that the lawyer was acting on behalf of the Russian government. The emails cannot be read in any way except to say, we want to meet with you to provide official Russian documents that will help your father and hurt Hillary Clinton. That is not permitted.
The fact that Trump Jr. appears to be rather enthusiastic to at least have a look at whatever they have, what do you make of that?
Looking is just as bad as taking. And we don't know what he got, and it doesn't matter whether he did. He had the meeting. He was willing to conspire with the Russian government, and that is not allowed. It is a threat to our democracy. It's very serious. And I do agree with what the FBI director nominee has said, which is that it should have been reported to the FBI.
All opponents, all political people, politicians, they look for opposition research. They look for, nasty things about their opponent. Why does this cross the line? Just because it was coming from a foreign entity?
Yes, because it was a foreign government. Yes, research on Google, that's fine. Research through human intelligence that are Americans, that's fine. That's what happens in a campaign. I personally would prefer to see the positive story come out rather than to see the negative side. But that's how campaigns are run now, and that's okay. But the law clearly says you cannot take a contribution of anything of value, which would include the opposition research, from a foreign entity, period. So that's all there is to it.
So even if there was no information exchange, which I take your point, you still think it's problematic, what laws were potentially broken then from what you can see in that exchange?
Well, the election laws would have been violated. There's a possible conspiracy, which is a separate crime, and a conspiracy requires an intent and an action in furtherance. And I would say that the intent is made clear from the fact that the email invited him to have a meeting to get Russian documents about the campaign that would be helpful to his father. He went ahead and planned the meeting, he had the meeting, and he even suggested the timing of the release of that information by saying, better later in the summer. We keep ignoring that half of the sentence that said, I love it. But it was, I love it, especially later in the summer, which is exactly when it was released.
And so that because that shows what to you? What does that second part of the sentence indicate?
That shows that possibly the Russians followed the advice of Donald Trump Jr. and waited to release it until it would do its maximum harm. It wasn't just information. It had to be timed so that it would hurt. And that's what happened. It caused the resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the head of the DNC. It caused chaos. It definitely hurt the Democrats.
There was
its mark.
Yeah, there was also this conversation, I guess, a phone call between Trump Jr. and this Russian pop star who's involved in all of this as well. Does that raise any flags for you? Because I guess we don't know what happened during that phone call. We wouldn't know, and how would we find out, or what might be happening to try and find out how that unfolded?
Well, given the history of false statements by Donald Trump Jr. in explaining this meeting, which he says was about adoptions at first, which is clearly ridiculous, and furthermore, adoption is really a code word for sanctions, so that's a serious problem, because sanctions were not appropriate for the presidential nominee to be discussing while he was just the nominee. It's only appropriate for the president to talk about. So there's a lot of issues here that need to be explored further. How we will ever know, well, unless there are tapes of the phone call, I don't know. And, you know, talking to Emin is not in itself a crime, but it depends on what they talked about.
Right.
I don't expect to find that out from Donald Trump Jr.
Emin is, of course, the pop star in question, the Russian pop star.
I just want to add, I love the cast of characters, much like Watergate, where you had characters like Gordon Liddy and Howard Hunt and Tony Ulasewicz and Chuck Colson. Here you have Rob Goldstone, whose photographs online are hysterical. You have a rock star in Russia. You have a Russian oligarch. You have Putin, who is, you know, came from the KGB to become the dictator, basically, of Russia. I mean, it's a really colorful cast of characters. I mean, look at the pictures of Putin online.
Yeah.
I love looking at them.
So if you're the special counsel right now, if you're Robert Mueller, what are you doing? You've seen this email chain. You've seen, as you point out, the evolving story. That's a nice way to put it. What do you think he's doing? If he didn't already have these, what more might he now pursue that would be legitimate in terms of a legal investigation?
Well, first of all, he needs to find out whether all of the emails have been released.
Sure.
We don't know that. We only know that the New York Times had at least some emails and called to Donald Trump and said, we're releasing them. And he said, well, give me some time to comment on it. And in that time, instead of commenting, he released them on Twitter.
Yeah.
But then the New York Times released them in chronological order, which makes a much more dramatic case for what happened. I would certainly look for, are there other emails between Donald Trump Jr. or anyone else in the campaign and the Russians? I would certainly want to interview Emin. I would want to interview the Russian lawyer. I would want to interview all of the participants in the meeting. I would want to interview Rona, Donald Trump's personal assistant, to find out whether, in fact, he received the same information. Having already questioned one president's, cross-examined one president's personal assistant, Rosemary Woods, I'd love the opportunity to question Rona. That would be a wonderful experience. But I totally trust Robert Mueller to do it. But I also would be working with Congress, because I think this is important beyond any criminal violations, to look at what does this mean for our democracy? What does this mean for our intelligence efforts? Why don't the American people find out before they have to vote in 2018 what happened here? I think we want to know the answers.
Let me finish with one quick question. Lots of people say, oh, well, this is just the way the Trump family operates and they are untouchable. You're sort of stuck with them. Given what you experienced through Watergate, what would you say to Americans that have just sort of said, oh, well, this is just their way of doing business?
Well, it's not the way that we want the government to be run. And I would say, relating it back to Watergate, Richard Nixon won the election in a landslide. He actually won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College, but he also won the popular vote, unlike Donald Trump. And I would say that at some point, the Republicans turned against him because they saw the facts, they saw the evidence, and it took Republicans who went to Richard Nixon and said, Mr. President, we can no longer support you. We've seen and heard the tape, the June 23rd smoking gun tape, and we will vote for impeachment and conviction if you don't resign. That's what led to his resignation, and I'm waiting for some Republican to have the same courage as Senator Goldwater and the others who went to see Richard Nixon had, and tell Donald Trump. And I was shocked by hearing Trey Gowdy, Senator Trey Gowdy, and Senator Dent, who are staunch conservative Republicans, who now are saying this may have gone too far. This is a terrible thing. This is wrong. So maybe this is the smoking gun that turns Republicans into people who will judge the facts and not just try to support the president because he's their president.
Jill Wine-Banks, I know you're a very busy lady these days. I do appreciate your perspective and your history too. It's very important to the story. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.